Excellent. So once again, we only have about 20 minutes, so we're going to get cranking. So I want you each to kind of do the same thing we just did in our last panel to kind of talk about, we're here to talk about development. In particular, we're looking at land use and real estate development. And so we have with us 3 individuals who are going to introduce themselves and kind of talk about their role in the development world. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, good morning. I am Wendy Estrella. I am a real estate attorney in the city of Lawrence, and I'm also a developer. Go Lawrence. I practice, my practice really focuses on real estate and some of landlord tenant law as well. And I'm also a local developer. My husband and I develop properties in the city. We also built some properties as well, and I was just sharing the story with you, Tracy, yesterday, where we're right now finishing up a 24-unit residential building in the city of Lawrence, and we were talking about the fact that it has been a very long time that a local developers have actually built a building from the ground up. There has been other buildings that have been built by nonprofit organizations. So we're proud to say that we are contributing small developers to the city with the need that we have for housing.
Excellent, thank you. Michelle?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
No. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So my name is Michelle Volpe, and as Tracy said, I'm the loan fund president at Blue Hub Capital. And you might be wondering what Blue Hub Capital is. It used to be Boston Community Capital, and about a year ago we changed our name. So we are a national community development financial institution, and I run the lending arm of that. And our mission is to create healthy communities where low-income people live and work. And we do that by providing loan capital to projects that for-profit developers and nonprofit developers create and often co-create with their communities and local and state officials. And so when we think about what a healthy community includes, it includes access to transit, it includes healthy access to healthy food, it includes affordable housing, access to quality education, quality health care, asthma-free environment. So, transit-oriented development is essential to the types of projects that we want to finance that we think really contribute to healthy communities. And I think I also want to say that Massachusetts is really blessed to have an ecosystem of lenders that are really eager to support this type of project. Our organization, Blue Hub Capital, is we've been lending to gateway cities for 35 years, and we partner in that work with a set of like-minded community development financial institutions, with quasi-public agencies, with regional and local banks. So there is debt capital out there to support your projects. And the hard work is really the, identifying the projects that are catalytic, developing projects that really express the needs of the community, and helping us understand that they are a priority. And so once you do that super hard work, we're super happy to lend money to it.
Excellent. Mickey?
So I'm Mickey Northcutt with North Shore CDC, and we were founded in the Point neighborhood in Salem in 1978, but then expanded our work throughout the North Shore about 10 years ago. And we've done a lot of, from wearing my developer hat for a minute, we've done a lot of work in Salem in particular with historic preservation in the last decade, but now have kind of the opposite lined up, lots of new construction coming over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think really all of our work is TOD friendly because we work in urban neighborhoods, not only in Salem, but Beverly and Gloucester. We have a new construction TOD friendly project starting next month in downtown Gloucester, which is really exciting for us. And then for those of us who know us in Salem, our housing work so far has been almost all in the Point neighborhood. But that's also an exciting thing for us. In the next year, we have 3 new projects that are all in coming soon phase in downtown, sort of proper downtown Salem, even closer to the train station.
Yeah, well, I want to say, I think El Punto is downtown, even though some folks might not. It is only a 10-minute walk from the train station. I mean, you got to walk through kind of like the core of downtown, but it's definitely within the TOD area, and it's kind of interesting to see that, you know, it kind of evolving and growing, and because of a lot of the placemaking as well as real estate development that's been happening there. But let's kind of get to some brass tacks on kind of like really the big issue around development in a lot of our gateway cities, in that, you know, in our report back in 2018, we identified that in some of our gateway cities, the gap between, you know, the cost of what it takes to do development and the rents that can be gotten because of, you know, what's really affordable in communities can be as high as 44%. How are each of you kind of dealing with that from your perspective in development? Yeah,
Well, I mean, I can say, because we're looking at this very issue right now, we would like to do more mixed income projects. So 2 of the 3 that I mentioned are going to be 70% affordable and 30% market rate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our first attempt at market rate housing. But really, honestly, it is challenging because of what you talk about. The rents are not really high enough to support even, you know, that's sort of the upper limit, we think, of what we can do for market rate housing.
Yeah. Yeah, Wendy?
Well, and for example, like you just mentioned, it's hard to start new development because of the cost being so high, and the rent, especially in Lawrence, don't necessarily support the cost. So as a smaller developer, what we've done has also been acquiring buildings that have not been utilized. A couple of years ago, we bought a building that was a former rooming house, and it was in real bad shape, and it had been closed for years, and we ended up being able to acquire the building and just rehabbing it and converting it into residential units. So that has been one way that we've been able to do that. But the new development right now that we're doing from the ground up has also been blessed enough to be able to own the land, and so that was one of the reasons why we decided to build, because it is a challenge, especially for smaller developer. What we do not have necessarily any either tax incentive, because and we talked about this, Tracy, yesterday, where I feel like smaller developers have a very difficult time because the funding really comes from the developer, and with the help of the banks in order to create this housing, market rate. So that's really a challenge because I feel like we do not get necessarily the help that most bigger developers get. It could be tax incentive programs. So it is a challenge, at least on the smaller scale of developers. And I feel like the development that we do are more to prevent gentrification, right? A lot of the smaller developers in the city are from the city, so we care about our people. We care about the people that occupy our property. So it's becoming tougher and tougher to do developing, but it's happening more and more. And as we get more information and more help, it's just becoming, it's happening within the city of Lawrence.
Okay. Yeah. So.
And I mean, I think there's no substitute really for public support in the form of subsidies. I think that is a really critical way to fill those gaps. But I think another thing that contributes to cost is time. And so predictability in the administration of those critical subsidies, I think, is also really important. And so if a developer understands what the timeline is and can compress the timeline, that can shrink the cost. And so that's a way that I think the ecosystem can really cut costs without actually spending more money.
And so what are some of those ways you can kind of like, number one, improve the predictability and also improve the support for our smaller developers. I know, Wendy, you mentioned approximately how many units do you guys have in housing units?
Yeah, at this point, we have 109 units
Okay.
within the Merrimack Valley. So
Okay.
it's,
So yeah, it's
you know,
pretty
throughout the
sizable.
years, it's
Yeah.
pretty sizable, but it has taken a few years. And again, as I said, it's really been pretty much my husband and I without any, you know, help or any subsidy help. And I think this is where there's a big gap between the smaller developers and the help that we get versus the bigger developers that come into the city and build, you know, 400 units, 600 units, and they do, you know, subsidized housing. So there's a big gap between subsidized housing and market rate housing that are built by the smaller developers.
I know that we have talked about in our neighborhood stabilization work about dealing with some like the vacancy and spot blight issues and the importance that kind of some of the smaller developers can have on kind of addressing that, or kind of looking at land assembly approaches to kind of bringing like multiple scattered parcels together and kind of doing development, you know, kind of all in one. Kind of what are some of the other things that we could be doing to kind of both make the process more predictable and also to give smaller developers more support, and then also be able to leverage some of the additional things that CDCs, that like North Shore CDC are bringing to the table in addition to the housing development, but also kind of like revitalizing the community around the developments themselves.
Well, I can say, I think one of the more important pieces of the work that we have done in the Point is acquiring existing distressed buildings that were really, you know, not only not affordable, but just eyesores and problematic in a variety of ways. And acquiring buildings at market has its own challenges. In our case, we don't have the kind of capital to just do that. So, Karen, I am going to be able to make a plug for the LISC TOD fund.
Yeah.
We've used the heck out of that fund, and it's allowed us to buy existing buildings and hold them for the inevitably long and painful hold periods until we're able to line up the permanent capital. But, you know, I think that's just an ongoing issue. Like, there's never enough of that money to go around. And I'll mention this, too. I think in our neighborhood, in the Point, one of our early strategies was to get that neighborhood listed on the National Register as a National Historic District. So we've renovated, I think, 19 buildings with state and federal historic credits and have another about 20 in the pipeline. And that's, you know, it just helps so much because it's not the traditional pool that we would be competing for with other housing projects. So it has its own, I think a lot of folks have used those tools, but using that en masse has made our whole pipeline move more quickly.
Okay. Some other ideas.
I think that kind of building off what Mickey was saying, there's a role for different types of developers to really help cement a sense of place in gateway cities. And I can think of some of our developer partners who've really taken on, you know, a key building or a key parcel that they felt would catalyze additional private investment. And so I think, you know, and so then that, you know, in some ways clears the path for private developers, large and small. And so, you know, to the extent that there is a really kind of robust community planning process where the community is, you know, that voice is really a part of the process in identifying what the key parcels are, and then there's, you know, support, public, private, philanthropic, to move those key parcels forward that then signal to the rest of the broader development investment community, this is a great place for you to invest your capital. I think, you know, kind of to echo an earlier theme, partnership and using kind of all of the partners in the ecosystem.
And I couldn't agree more in terms of, I believe partnership has been at least a big part of what we have been doing in Lawrence, where, you know, nonprofit, for-profit, just people coming together in partnership to kind of find out what is it that the city needs. And you know, in the past, I would say probably past 5 years, there've been a large amount of residential units that have been built, but there is a disconnect between you know, the residents that have moved into the city and what we have to offer those residents. So I think part of, you know, making the city vibrant again, there has to be a partnership, because we all have to kind of come together and not just acquire this building, but what is it that we're acquiring, and what for? What is it that the community really needs in order to create a community that would be vibrant and can not just live there, but also not just sleep there, as I said. Because
Yeah.
what we're seeing, at least in Lawrence, is that we have a lot of residents have moved into Lawrence because of the housing that have been built lately, especially in the the large buildings that were utilized as factories in the past. So lots of housing, but not enough places for people to go shop or go restaurants and the like. So I think it's a combination of both things. And to echo what Christopher was saying, it's like there has to be a combination there of not just housing, but also where people can spend their money within the community. So partnerships, I think, is important to sort of create that environment overall.
Well, as we talk about, of course, transit-oriented development, the reason why you do TOD is to create these transit-oriented communities or the walk-ups. And I remember looking for a new place to live, and I was actually looking in our gateway cities, and talking to folks about apartments that were available in some of the newer developments. I remember one person just kept trying to sell me, well, we have a shuttle that takes you back and forth from our development into Haymarket, but there was nothing around the development itself except for parking. And I'm like, this is not how I want to live.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the reason why I chose to move back into Boston.
Yeah.
And so how would you I know that we have a quote unquote housing crisis in Boston, but it looks a lot different in our gateway cities. Can we talk a little bit more about that? I mean, you talked a little bit about displacement, but we talk about a lot of people getting displaced out of Boston and into our gateway cities, but we're also finding in some of our gateway cities that people are getting displaced out of the gateway cities into other communities, if not leaving the state.
At least in my part, and that's why I feel like the smaller developers are important. We see, which we have, quite a few, and I think it's important to focus as well on those smaller developers, because I think they're the ones who are also providing those housing for the people that have resided there for a long time. And I was one of them when I first migrated to United States. So I do have a personal connection with the community, and I have a personal connection to the community. I think it happens a lot with the smaller developers. So I think it's extremely important to support them so that we can keep creating those housings that people can afford, and they can, and it's not so difficult to get in, and that's the other process. I mean, you'll find residents having a difficult time getting into a lot of these units because of what the requirements, why it could very well be what their earnings are. I helped a client get into one of the units. It was $2,900 a month, and I mean, this is in Lawrence. It's a 3-bedroom apartment, and I'm thinking to myself, and they have to pay for utilities, and I thought it was a little bit outrageous. I mean, it's very nice, but who can really afford it? So that's what we sort of, we have to sort of fill that gap, and I feel like the smaller developers help that, and I include myself in it because of the redevelopment that we've done, or just like that building that we're building right now, actually a little bit below market rate as I see it, and we're renting exactly to our people because it's in the middle of Lawrence, and people just know the smaller developers, and that's where they go, right? So that they don't have to move out of the city. So I believe that the smaller developers are important within the gateway communities to prevent gentrification and people moving out because they can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, I think one of the key gaps that we see is a really, and I think about it from the financing side, financing mechanism for the mixed-use properties that have ground floor, street level, retail, commercial with housing above, and that is, it's critical to a vibrant, healthy downtown, and they're really hard to finance. And if they're hard to finance, they're even harder to develop. And so that's, I don't have a solution there, but I think it's a really important challenge for us to just keep working on, because I think the vibrancy of community that continues to, make a community of choice, really demands that there are amenities available for residents that serve them, that are what they are looking for, and that there's a place for small businesses to incubate and grow, that the quality of the space, the size of the space, the cost of the space is what they need. And I think there's a mismatch in many of our communities in that asset class.
Well, we do have a lot of tools for doing residential development here in the state, but we don't have much to support commercial development.
Yeah.
And we know that in some of our gateway cities, there's a lot of empty space, but it might not be wired or up to code or at a level where it makes sense to kind of, put the kind of money into it. Kind of what kind of tools could we be thinking about? Because we can't have, Chris showed some really great images of some of these, of what it takes to create a sense of place, but without being able to finance it, how are we going to create these places that are activated and provide people with amenities? And when we talk about amenities, these aren't, extras. These are things like grocery stores. These are, that people can afford. These are places that, services that people actually need, on a day-to-day basis. Because if they can't get in their communities, they're going to be clogging our streets trying to get to them in other communities. So what can we be doing to kind of catalyze some more commercial development and doing more of that kind of mixed-use development in our gateway cities?
I mean, I'll throw out there that I think there's a really important role for anchor institutions, thinking about, funding projects like that, or also, I think master leasing vacant space is a really helpful way to get it financed.
Yeah. What is master leasing?
So master leasing is really who's taking responsibility for keeping the space leased up and paying the debt. And so having a larger, stable organization with strong financial situation, taking responsibility for that, then allows a little bit more flexibility on the term of the lease or the cost of the lease. So it allows financing to flow and brings in another kind of form of financial support.
I think that Haverhill has done, Northern Essex Community College is working in partnership with the developer, the building there, to create a part of the culinary school for Northern Essex Community College, and also like a community kitchen for all the food businesses that are kind of need some place to kind of cook. And so, I mean, that's a kind of a partnership that I think about as you talk about kind of the master lease and the way to kind of spark that in TOD areas. What are some other?
And if I could just add, I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges that we're having right now. We're facing in the city of Lawrence, as I said. Many residential units are being built, many people are moving in, but again, it's a disconnect from the local businesses and accessible places for people to go and do what they need to do. And I find, I mean, there is great effort right now going on in the city, partnerships. There is the Lawrence Partnership has been an important organization to support a lot of the efforts that are going on in the city right now to kind of create that environment and bringing in businesses and trying to help developers to do that, exactly what you had just mentioned, creating that commercial space on the bottom with residential units on the top, especially in the main street of Lawrence, which is Essex Street. So there's definitely a bigger need. I mean, we have housing, we still have a shortage because the community has been growing fairly fast, but that's where I see the biggest issue, being that we just don't have these places where people can live. Lots of the people moving in are people who are just being displaced from Boston because they have the commuter rail, so they move to there because it's more affordable. However, they just go sleep in Lawrence, right? Because they come to Boston, they work in Boston, and they sleep in Lawrence. So it's just creating that that ecosystem that works for everyone, and it can only be done, as I see it, with the help, just partnerships.
Well, once again, getting the note that we're out of time. Mickey, do you have a closing comment? Because I think our next panel will be kind of talking a little bit about what we can do to make sure that people not only live but also work in our gateway cities.
I'll just say briefly on the issue of including commercial space and mixed use. I think all of our new construction projects have dealt with that issue, and like Michelle said, with the master lease issue, we have sort of a limited appetite to guarantee all that space ourselves. So it's sort of a combination of, it's like a surgical design tactic where we want to create retail but minimize the amount of square feet to so that we have less to guarantee, but also just small rentable spaces that are really well suited for smaller businesses and entrepreneurs. And then the other tack is that we've developed some commercial retail space that we use as program space. It's like activated, cool space with ourselves or partners, so that the community still gets that feel, but we kind of eliminate or reduce that financial risk aspect of it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I'm now going to ask our third panel to come up, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.